On January 14, 2026, Trump gave Nvidia permission to sell its most powerful AI chips to China. The very next day, China banned them from entering the country. And in the next 25 minutes, I'm going to show you exactly why this whiplash is threatening the entire $3 trillion AI boom, how it affects every tech stock in your portfolio, and what happens when the world's two largest economies can't agree on who controls the future of artificial intelligence. It's January 19, 2026. Last week was one of the most bizarre in the history of the semiconductor industry. Let me walk you through what happened day by day, cause the timeline matters. Tuesday, January 13th, the information reports that the Chinese government asked some tech companies to temporarily hold plans to buy Nvidia's H200 AI chips, only allowing purchases under special circumstances like university research. Wednesday, January 14th morning, the U.S. Department of Commerce's Bureau of Industry and Security formally approves Nvidia H200 chip exports to China under specific conditions. After months of lobbying by Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang, including a personal meeting with President Trump in December 2025, the ban is lifted. Nvidia releases a statement. We applaud President Trump's decision to allow America's chip industry to compete, to support high-paying jobs and manufacturing in America. Offering H200 to approved commercial customers, vetted by the Department of Commerce, strikes a thoughtful balance that is great for America. Wednesday, January 14th afternoon. Hours later, Trump signs a proclamation imposing a 25% tariff on advanced AI semiconductors that have been produced outside the US and then pass through the US before being exported to customers in other countries, including the Nvidia H200 and AMD MI325X. Wednesday, January 14th evening, Reuters reports that Chinese customs authorities told customs agents this week that Nvidia's H200 artificial intelligence chips are not permitted to enter China, according to 3 people briefed on the matter. Thursday, January 15th, Chinese government officials summoned domestic technology companies to meetings where they were explicitly instructed not to purchase the chips unless necessary. One source told Reuters, the wording from the officials is so severe that it is basically a ban for now, though this might change in the future should things evolve. So in 48 hours, Trump approves the sale, imposes a 25% tariff on it, and China bans it anyway. Nvidia stock fell 1.6% over 2 days. But that's just the beginning. Because what's really happening here isn't about one chip or one company. It's about the end of the global semiconductor market. As we know it, what is the H200 and why does it matter? It's 3 o'clock to 6:30. Before we go further, you need to understand what the H200 actually is and why both countries are fighting over it. The H200 is Nvidia's second most powerful AI chip, part of the Hopper generation that preceded their newest Blackwell chips. Is specifically designed for training and running large AI models, the kind that power ChatGPT, image generation, autonomous vehicles, and advanced data analysis. According to reporting, Chinese technology companies have placed orders for more than 2 million H200 chips, priced at around $27,000 each. That's over $54 billion in potential sales, and that's just the initial demand. But here's the critical detail. Those orders far exceed Nvidia's inventory of 700,000 chips. Demand from China alone is nearly 3 times Nvidia's current production capacity. Why China wants these chips? China is in an AI arms race. Companies like Alibaba, Tencent, ByteDance, and Baidu are investing tens of billions of dollars in AI infrastructure. They need the most powerful chips available to compete with American companies like OpenAI, Google, and Anthropic. The H200 delivers roughly 6 times the performance of the H20, a weaker chip that Nvidia specifically designed to comply with earlier US export restrictions. For context, export restrictions in mid-April 2025 prevented Nvidia from sending the H20 to China, and even after that ban was lifted months later, demand from China never materialized, according to Nvidia CFO Colette Kress in the company's Q3 earnings report. Reports suggested that China banned its leading technology giants from purchasing these H20 semiconductors, instead pushing them toward domestic alternatives. But the H200 is different. It's powerful enough to matter. And that's exactly why it's become a geopolitical weapon. The manufacturing reality? Here's what most people don't understand. Nvidia doesn't manufacture its own chips. The company designs them, but production happens at Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company TSMC in Taiwan. So the chips are designed in California, manufactured in Taiwan, and sold to customers around the world. But under Trump's new rules, chips destined for China must be routed through the US for testing by an independent third-party lab rather than being shipped directly from Taiwan. This routing requirement is what triggers the 25% tariff. Every H200 chip headed to China must physically pass through the United States, where the tariff is collected. At $27,000 per chip, a 25% tariff adds $6,750 to the cost. That's significant. But it gets worse when you understand Trump's actual demand. Let me explain what's really happening with these tariffs, because the official story doesn't match reality. According to multiple reports from 2025, Trump didn't just want tariffs, he wanted a direct cut of Nvidia's China sales. Bloomberg reported that Trump initially demanded a 15% cut of Nvidia's sales to China in exchange for allowing the H20 chip. Then, when he agreed to allow the more powerful H200, Trump said he would permit exports in exchange for a 25% cut of those sales. Think about what that means. This isn't a trade policy designed to protect American manufacturing or national security. It's a revenue-sharing agreement, where the US government takes a quarter of the proceeds from American companies' foreign sales. Trump signed an executive order Wednesday, establishing a 25% tariff on imports of select semiconductors, including the H200, in a process that would allow the US to collect the levies before they are shipped to China. The impossible economics. Here's the math. A Chinese company wants to buy an H200 chip. Base price, $27,000. Add 25%. Total cost before Chinese import duties, $33,750. But here's the problem. China has now effectively banned these imports. So Nvidia has permission to sell, the chips exist, demand is massive, but Chinese customs won't let them enter the country. Why would China ban chips its companies desperately want? According to reports, Trump's request for a kickback from Nvidia's China sales appeared to turn off officials in Beijing, who began clamping down on imports last summer. In other words, China sees Trump's tariff as extortion, and they're refusing to play along, even if it means their own tech companies suffer in the short term. The domestic production exemption. There's one more layer to this. According to the White House fact sheet, the 25% tariff would not apply to chips imported to support the build-out of the U.S. technology supply chain and the strengthening of domestic manufacturing capacity for derivatives of semiconductors. In practice, this means if you're a U.S. company buying H200 chips for use in American data centers, you don't pay the tariff. The tariff only applies to chips being exported to other countries, primarily China. This is Trump's leverage play. Make it expensive to sell abroad, make it free to use domestically, and pressure chip makers to build more manufacturing capacity in the United States. Nvidia praised the policy publicly, but privately, they're facing a nightmare scenario where they've secured legal permission to access a $54 billion market that China is now blocking. Even if China reversed its ban tomorrow, Nvidia still faces nearly impossible conditions to actually export these chips. According to the Bureau of Industry and Security approval announced Tuesday, January 13th, here are the requirements. Condition 1. Third-party verification. Shipments must undergo third-party testing to verify AI capabilities before leaving the United States. This adds time, cost, and logistical complexity to every sale. Condition 2. Volume cap. China-bound volumes are capped at 50% of US, so if Nvidia sells 100,000 H200 chips to US customers, they can sell a maximum of 50,000 to Chinese customers. Given that Chinese demand is over 2 million chips and current global production is only 700,000, this cap is devastating. Condition 3. Supply assurance. Nvidia must certify that there are enough H200s in the US, meaning they have to prove American customers aren't being deprived of chips before they can export any to China. Condition 4. Security procedures. Chinese customers are required to meet security requirements and commit to non-military use. They must demonstrate sufficient security procedures and cannot use the chips for military purposes. Condition 5. No production reduction. License applicants must demonstrate that shipments to China will not reduce the global semiconductor capacity available to U.S. customers. These aren't minor bureaucratic hurdles. These are structural barriers designed to make exports difficult, expensive, and limited in scale. The licensing nightmare, and all of this assumes Nvidia even gets the export licenses approved. The BS export policy takes effect January 16, 2026, which was this past Thursday. But securing export license approval from BS is a process that typically spans weeks to months with no clear timeline for completion. So Nvidia can't ship anything yet anyway. They're waiting for licenses that may or may not be approved to sell into a market that has already banned the product under conditions that cap their sales at levels far below demand, while paying a 25% tariff that makes the economics questionable. With China already skeptical, and the chips now carrying a significant price premium due to import duties, Nvidia faces the prospect of having secured legal permission to sell into a market that may prove economically unviable. Now let's talk about why China is taking this stance. Because it's not just about rejecting Trump's tariff demands. It's about a long-term strategy that threatens every American tech company. Throughout the final quarter of 2025, the Chinese Ministry of Industry and Information Technology had reportedly been urging domestic powerhouses like Alibaba Group and Tencent Holdings to voluntarily reduce their reliance on American silicon. By mid-January 2026, this guidance transitioned into formal mandates, requiring a specific ratio of domestic to foreign chip procurement for any state-linked or large-scale AI project. This is China's play. Use the current chip restrictions as justification to accelerate domestic semiconductor development, even if it means short-term pain for Chinese tech companies. The domestic alternatives: China has been investing billions in domestic chip companies. The leaders are Huawei's HiSilicon. Their Ascend 910 series of AI chips has been gaining ground. Reports suggest the company plans to double its production capacity in 2026 to meet the void left by Nvidia. Micron Technologies and more threads are positioning their latest architectures as good enough replacements for Nvidia's Hopper and Blackwell generations. The consensus among analysts is that Chinese chips still lag behind American technology by about 2 generations. Cloud service providers and AI startups in China, such as ByteDance, now face a compute deficit, as domestic chips still reportedly struggle with lower yields and performance gaps compared to the H200. But here's what matters. China is willing to accept that performance gap if it means achieving long-term independence from U.S. suppliers. The geopolitical chess game River Goujon, a geopolitical strategist at Rhodium Group, told Reuters that Beijing's restrictions on the H200 could be aimed at exerting leverage on Washington in the run-up to U.S. President Donald Trump's April visit to China to meet with Xi Jinping. She added, Beijing is pushing to see what bigger concessions they can get to dismantle US-led tech controls. In other words, the H200 ban might be temporary, a bargaining chip, pun intended, to extract concessions from Trump on broader technology export controls. Or it might be permanent, a declaration that China will no longer depend on American chips, regardless of the short-term costs. We won't know which until April. But either way, American chip companies are caught in the middle. If you own any tech stocks, mutual funds, or index funds, you're exposed to this. Let me show you how. Nvidia's exposure. Nvidia is the obvious one. China was once Nvidia's second largest market. CEO Jensen Huang said in recent comments that the company's share of the AI chip market in the world's second largest economy had shrunk to zero after China blocked H20 sales starting in August 2025. The H200 was supposed to change that. It was supposed to reopen the Chinese market. Now that door has slammed shut again. Nvidia stock fell modestly last week, down about 1.6% over 2 days. But the market is betting this is temporary. If it's not, if China makes this ban permanent, Nvidia loses access to what could have been a $50+ billion annual market. Your 401k probably owns Nvidia. It's in the S&P 500. It's in the Nasdaq 100. It's in virtually every technology-focused fund. When Nvidia moves, your portfolio moves. The semiconductor equipment makers. But it's not just Nvidia. The broader semiconductor equipment sector felt the heat as well, with Applied Materials, Lam Research, and KLA Corporation, all seeing declines between 2% and 3.5% in the days following the China ban. These companies make the machines that manufacture chips. If China doubles down on domestic production and stops buying American chips, demand for American semiconductor equipment falls too. Applied Materials, Lam Research, KLA. These are stocks owned by every major tech fund, and they're all vulnerable to the same dynamic. AMD gets hit. Trump's 25% tariff applies to AMD's MI325X processor as well, not just Nvidia's H200. AMD faces the same impossible conditions, the same tariffs, the same Chinese ban. AMD is smaller than Nvidia in the AI chip market, but is still a major player, and it's in your index funds too. Memory suppliers. Here's one most people miss. Memory suppliers like Micron Technology are navigating a complex memory bottleneck, where high bandwidth memory HBM supply is being prioritized for US-approved shipments. High bandwidth memory is critical for AI chips. Micron makes it. If demand from China collapses, Micron's revenue projections take a hit. Again, Micron is in the S&P 500. It's in your portfolio. The AI narrative risk. But here's the biggest danger, and it's not about any individual stock. It's about the narrative. The entire stock market rally of 2024 and 2025 has been driven by AI optimism. The belief that AI will revolutionize every industry, create trillions in new value, and justify sky-high valuations for tech companies. That narrative depends on global growth. It depends on companies in the US, China, Europe, and everywhere else adopting AI at scale. If the water bifurcates into a US AI ecosystem and a Chinese AI ecosystem, with no chips flowing between them, the total addressable market for American companies shrinks dramatically. China represents 30% of global GDP. Losing that market doesn't just hurt Nvidia. It undermines the entire growth story that's been propping up tech valuations. And if investors start questioning the AI narrative, if they start thinking maybe this isn't going to be as big as we thought, you don't get a 2% pullback. You get a 20% correction. If you think I'm being dramatic, let me give you some historical context. During the original Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union, the West imposed strict export controls on technology. The Coordinating Committee for Multilateral Export Controls, COCOM, was established in 1949 to prevent the Soviet Union from accessing Western technology. Computers, semiconductors, manufacturing equipment, all banned from export to the Eastern Bloc. The result? The Soviet Union developed its own technology industry. It was less advanced, less efficient, and ultimately less competitive. But it existed, and it meant Western companies lost access to a massive market. When the Cold War ended and restrictions were lifted in the 1990s, it took decades for Western technology companies to rebuild market share in former Soviet states. Now we're doing the same thing with China, except China is far more economically important than the Soviet Union ever was. China is 18% of global GDP. The Soviet Union at its peak was maybe 10%. And China has 1.4 billion people, a massive middle class, and tech companies that rival anything in Silicon Valley. Cutting American chip companies off from China doesn't just hurt profits. It gives Chinese competitors years of protected market share to develop alternatives. And once those alternatives are good enough, Chinese companies won't come back to American suppliers, even if restrictions are lifted. This isn't temporary market disruption. It's the permanent fragmentation of the global technology industry. So where do we go from here? There are three possible outcomes, and all of them are bad for American tech companies in different ways. Scenario 1. China backs down. China reverses its ban, accepts Trump's conditions, and allows limited H200 imports under strict controls. This is the best-case scenario for Nvidia. They get some access to the Chinese market, even if it's capped and expensive. But even in this scenario, the damage is done. Chinese companies have been pushed toward domestic alternatives. Trust is broken. The relationship is permanently damaged. And Trump's 25% tariff and volume caps mean Nvidia will never recapture the full potential of the Chinese market. Scenario 2. Stalemate. The current situation continues. China maintains its de facto ban. Nvidia has theoretical permission to export, but can't actually sell anything because Chinese customs won't allow the chips to enter. This is what most analysts expect. It remains unclear whether Beijing wants to ban H200 chips outright, so that domestic chip companies can flourish, or is still chewing over restrictions, or whether these measures could be used as a bargaining tactic in talks with Washington. The stalemate continues through April, when Trump visits China. Maybe they strike a deal, maybe they don't. In the meantime, Nvidia loses billions in potential revenue, and investors start getting nervous about AI growth projections. Scenario 3. Permanent decoupling. China makes the ban permanent and goes all in on domestic semiconductor self-sufficiency. This is the nightmare scenario. American chip companies lose the Chinese market entirely. Chinese companies develop competitive alternatives over the next 3-5 years. The global tech industry splits into two incompatible ecosystems. This scenario leads to a major correction in tech stocks as investors reprice growth assumptions. What to watch. The next critical date is April 2026, when Trump is scheduled to meet with Chinese President Xi Jinping. If they reach an agreement on chip exports, markets will rally. If the meeting fails, expect a sell-off. In the meantime, watch Nvidia's earnings reports. Watch for any comments from CEO Jensen Huang about China demand. Watch Chinese tech companies' chip procurement announcements. And watch domestic Chinese chip companies. If Huawei or Cambricon announce major production increases or performance breakthroughs, that's a signal China is serious about permanent decoupling. A week ago, Nvidia thought it had won. After months of lobbying, Trump approved H200 exports to China. The path was cleared. Billions in sales were within reach. 48 hours later, China banned the chips from entering the country. Trump imposed a 25% tariff. And the entire AI growth story that's been driving tech stocks hit a wall called geopolitics. This isn't about one chip or one company. It's about the end of the global semiconductor market, as we've known it for 30 years. Forrester senior analyst Alvin Nguyen said, the real story is not whether H200 itself makes or breaks enterprise AI plans. The story is that even legacy silicon is no longer safe from last-minute policy swings. He added, enterprises used to worry about whether chips were fast enough or cost-effective enough. Now they have to worry about whether geopolitical conflicts will cut off their supply chain overnight. Nvidia has permission to sell. China won't let them. Trump wants a 25% cut. Chinese companies desperately need the chips, but are being told to buy domestic instead. And your tech stocks, your index funds, your 401k, they're all sitting in the middle of this mess. The H200 ban started on January 14th, 2026. We're 6 days in. And this could be the beginning of a complete restructuring of the global technology industry. If you learned something today, share this, because the chip war between the US and China isn't some abstract geopolitical drama. It's happening in real time. It's affecting the stocks you own. And it's going to determine whether the AI boom everyone's betting on actually happens or collapses under the weight of nationalist politics. The question isn't whether this affects you. The question is whether you're prepared for what comes next. And right now, nobody, not Nvidia, not China, not even Trump, knows the answer.